Hello and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're joined by Centre for Brexit Studies Director, Professor Alex de Ruyter. So Alex, changes to travel insurance and passport rules for UK holidaymakers after Brexit are being highlighted in a series of adverts starting this week. The government's campaign, which is titled UK's New Start, Let's Get Going, will provide advice on how to prepare for the end of the transition period on 31st of December. The government say that most of the actions that citizens and businesses are being asked to take will need to be completed regardless of the ongoing negotiations between the UK and the EU. So do you think it could be difficult to prepare when we're all still unsure of what the outcome could be?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's very difficult for businesses to prepare when there's still so much uncertainty. And to be honest, I think an awful lot is still hoping for something more comprehensive with the EU than just a bare bones free trade for tourists, so things are more straightforward. There are certain things you'll need to do that are not needed at present, but most of these can be outlined by the government. For certain cases, though, some people are likely to face much bigger hurdles. For example, if you own a property in the EU and you share your time between the UK and the EU state, of course. For those travelling between the UK and the EU on business, and that'll include commercial vehicle drivers, of course, there are still some questions hanging over that too, because of course with the community driving licence at the moment for hauliers, you can pass from one EU member country to another, but with the extra payment provisions with the UK leaving, question marks there will hang over what will happen to travel between one state and another. And of course, there'll be big issues to be resolved then when moving goods across the Channel or across the Irish Sea, of course, because Northern Ireland will, to all intensive purposes, on a de facto basis, stay in the single market and customs union, which will result in the need, of course, for customs declarations to take place when moving goods between Britain and Northern Ireland. And, it remains to be seen how they'll be enforced, of course,
So Priti Patel is setting out post-Brexit immigration details, which will come into force on New Year's Day, which will immediately end freedom of movement with the EU. The government wants to bring in a points-based immigration system, with those wishing to live and work in the UK must gaining 70 points. So what actually are the factors behind the points then, and what will increase someone's chance of being able to live and work in the UK?
Well, you mentioned an end to freedom of movement from EU states, of course, but the main factors, to this policy are actually pretty similar to what they are now. In particular, higher levels of education gain additional points, as do higher salary levels or working in a so-called shortage occupation. The mandatory conditions, of course, will include having a firm job offer from a licensed sponsor, English language skills, and the job, of course, must be of a certain skill level. However, there will be other routes into the UK, including, for certain high-skilled workers whose numbers will be capped, and a health and care visa. Although some of the specifics of this are still a bit hazy, it is notable, I think, that social care is not included amongst that. Students and graduates will still be able to study in the UK and work. The framing's changed somewhat to reflect a points-based approach, but ultimately the requirements are relatively similar to the current Tier 4 visa requirements for these people. The need for a firm offer relating to a specific course at a specific institution, the requisite English language skills, and the ability to finance oneself as a full-time student.
And a recent study has shown that 3 in 4 UK firms are unprepared for Brexit. The IOD says half of companies questioned cannot fully plan for the end of transition period. That's due to the lack of clarity on rules. So this could obviously be a really tough time for businesses then, especially those dealing with the pandemic, as well as trying to understand what Brexit means for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting away from it. This will be a tough time. And I'm not surprised at the lack of preparation, given the uncertainties businesses still face. We're 4 years after the referendum, we're still faced with a situation here where we might get a trade agreement with the EU by the end of the year, or we might leave with no agreement in place by the end of the year, or there may be some fudge situation whereby they extend the transition period further. Yeah, personally, I think the no-deal scenario is the most probable one, given that the government are continuing to insist on having a trade agreement which would absolve them of having to abide by any European regulatory strictures. They want to have their cake and eat it too, still, as it appears. So I'm not convinced of the seriousness of the UK government in that regard, but their stated position still is to have an agreement. But, we still have 3 scenarios on the table here. So is it any wonder then that cash-strapped businesses are going to be reluctant to spend money when they don't quite know what they're spending for. But having said that, you know, if you can, you should treat it as a risk management scenario. What's the worst case scenario, and see what mitigating strategies, if any, you can put in place if there's no trade agreement. You know, do you have a potential to rejig your supply chain? You know, is it possible to source more locally? Are any of these options on the table? And I think the key issue, and coming back to that, of course, is a lot of businesses simply don't have the bandwidth to do this, especially given, you know, as you mentioned there, the devastation brought by COVID-19. But I suppose, you know, moreover, there's a lot that businesses simply can't prepare for. Yeah, we can control what tariff schedule we apply to imports coming into the country, but we can't impose the same going the other way, as Michel Barnier made clear. You know, just because the UK government defers import duties, they're not going to do the same thing. Come January the 1st, if there's no agreement in place, UK goods bound into the EU will be subject to customs checks. They will. And so, you know, given that, then there are, you know, other things that businesses simply can't control over. I mean, what level of port disruption will they face? How prepared are French customs officials for the additional workload that Brexit will impose? What will happen if other businesses fail to prepare and cause a backlog at customs? All of these issues are problematic. And so, you know, to conclude, it doesn't surprise me at all that not many of these firms have really made any preparations as such.
Thanks for joining us, Alex.
You're welcome.